You want this slide, Cole, do you?
Have we started?
Yes.
Well. No, I'm good. I'm good. Can we all see okay?
Yes.
You can see that? Can you see me? More importantly. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, before I start, I've been asked to let you know the Summer Fete is here next Wednesday, 12 till 5. Miss it, miss out, I'm telling you, okay? It's going to be good stuff. So please do come along to that. But tonight, we have a talk on AVRO. And seriously, I started out, as I do with quite a lot of these talks, I'm like, well, it's Oldham, I'll research it, I'll do a talk on it. Not necessarily expecting to find it the most fascinating thing, no disrespect, love you Oldham. But my goodness, I've discovered an affinity with planes, I really do. And I hope you all like planes, because there's lots and lots of planes in tonight's talk. I'm not giving you any spoilers there, it's more of a public service announcement, okay? So yes, this was based in Chadderton, and I'm sure most, if not all of you, have heard of it, know what they did there. And tonight I'm going to go into detail. Now, AVRO popped up in Chadderton in 1939, but as always, I go back as far as I possibly can, so I'm starting pre-1939. I'm going to bring you the story of the company before, it became, part of Oldham's history. And I'm going to start actually with the brothers who created the company. And I thought that bit would be a quick, here's who they are, this is what they did. But they were a lot more interesting than I anticipated, so I hope you enjoyed their stories too. So here we go. So the Verdon Roe brothers, that's who they were. There were two. There was Elliot and there was Humphrey. We're going to start with the older of the two, this rather dashing chap. Yeah, Elliot Verdon Roe. And his first name was actually Edwin, but I think I'd have gone with Elliot. It just sounds more exotic. He was born in Eccles in April 1877. And when he was 14, he took himself off to Canada, as you did, late 19th century. He went off, age 14, to Canada to train. He'd secured a position to train as a surveyor, but when he got there, for whatever reason, the job didn't materialise. So he spent a year in Canada, I presume trying to find something else before coming back to Blighty, at which point he became an apprentice at the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway before joining the Merchant Navy. He'd actually wanted to join the Royal Navy, but they said, no, don't want ya. So he went to the Merchant Navy. And it was during this period that he discovered his interest, his passion for designing planes. In 1906, he became secretary for the Royal Aeronautical Society, which was founded in 1866. And he was briefly a draftsman, a technical engineer, an engineering technician. I don't understand any of it. And he went out to America working on twin rotor aircraft in Denver, but he had, creative differences about the designs that he was interested in, so he left, came back to England. So in 1907, things started to pick up for Elliot. He entered a competition in the Daily Mail, I love this, 1907, for designing flying models. It's just so cool. And he won. And he won a prize of £75, which, as I know you'll want to know, is worth about £12,000 today. Yeah, hey, big money. And he put this money to good use. He used it to build a full-size plane down in Putney, and he claimed he had his first successful flight on the 8th of June 1907. And this was only 3.5 years after the first successful flight of the somewhat famous Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, which took place in December 1903. So Elliot named this aircraft the AVRO plane. So cool. It was officially known as the Roe 1 biplane, but AVRO plane. Yeah, it sounds like something out of a Bond film. And you can see it today at the London Science Museum, or you can see it here, if you can't make it to London. So that was his very first plane, 1907, the AVRO plane. And following this success, he founded AVRO in 1910. AVRO, Elliot Verdenro. AVRO. You've probably worked that out yourself, but it took me, I was just like, I got through all this thinking, but why was that? Oh, then the penny eventually dropped.
How was it powered? Because you can't see much of an engine there.
No. Two elastic bands.
I'm going to say there was an engine in there, or a battery, or he pedalled, or a big elastic band. But, you know, now I'm keeping an eye on you. And that is an excellent question. It's an excellent question. I didn't think about that. I thought about a billion things. I didn't think about how did they actually flame and work. So, I don't know. Mice on a wheel. Let's go with that one. Damn you, that's a great question. I will find out. So in the 1930s, Elliot did become a member of Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists. Not necessarily a great look. However, he was also part of a campaign against banks charging interest on money they loaned you. So, yeah, wasn't all bad. He and his wife Eliza had 9 children. I know, what is it with people in these parts? They get these enormous families. 4 sons and 5 daughters. Sadly, 2 of their sons lost their lives in World War II. They both served in the RAF, obviously. Eric Verdenro died aged 26 in 1941, and Leighton Verdenro died aged 22 in 1943. So Elliot himself did not serve in a combat capacity in the wars, but he did serve his country. He ran AVRO in World War I, producing aircraft for the British war effort. So AVRO developed the AVRO 504, which was the most famous and most widely used aircraft during World War I. And I'll be back with the AVRO 504 once we've had a quick look at the younger brother, Humphrey. But just to finish with Elliot, he died in January 1958. So Humphrey, this rather handsome young man, he was 1 year younger than Elliot, born in April 1878. So he did not venture forth to Canada. After finishing school, he enlisted in the army into the Manchester Regiment, and he served in the Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902. And when he returned home in 1902, an uncle who owned a webbing manufacturers in Birmingham had died, so Humphrey went down to take over the running of AVRO and Company. This had nothing to do with planes. The most successful product AVRO produced was Bullseye men's trouser braces. But, you know, hey, planes, braces. The address here, you probably can't see it, but it says Brownsfield Mills, Manchester. That's what I was trying to say earlier, right? We will be coming back to. So clearly Humphrey had moved the company or the production up to Manchester at some point. In 1909, Humphrey invested in Elliot's aeronautical inventions and became managing director of AVRO, and he also did a lot of flying. But unfortunately, the brothers fell out in 1917 and Humphrey withdrew from AVRO, cutting all ties with the business. He joined the Royal Flying Corps, saw active service during World War I, until March 1918 when he injured his spine in a bad accident during a bombing raid over Germany and was forced to leave his piloting days behind him. Now, one of the very interesting things I discovered about Humphrey, he was an early advocate for the use of birth control. He had seen the all too awful effects on women in Manchester from having too many children, the poverty, the ill health. And he actually approached St Mary's Hospital in 1917 and offered to finance a birth control clinic on the premises, but the hospital said no. I mean, at this time, birth control, well, decent people didn't talk about that, so we're not going to have that, thank you very much. But he didn't stop there. Later on that year, he met a lady you may have heard of, Marie Stopes, who rather famously was an advocate of exactly the same thing. She wrote her famous / infamous book, Married Love, a pet manual, that revolutionised public discussions around intimacy, advocating, amongst other things, mutual consent for women, marriages should be equal partnerships, and she wanted very much to bring birth control into public discourse. But this, of course, scandalised society, and publishers considered it far too obscene to print. And to Humphrey, he met Marie, who used his wealth to finance the publishing of the book, and financing it independently allowed Marie to bypass censorship. The book became an instant sensation, selling out 6 runs in a matter of weeks, despite being condemned by the medical establishment and the church. So clearly a meeting of minds, because Humphrey and Marie got married the following year. Yeah. And they opened Marie's famous birth control clinic in March 1921, 61 Marlborough Road in London. Marie was the famous figurehead, Humphrey more of a background guy. And they had one son, Harry Stokes Rowe. I've not heard of him. Turns out he was a famous philosopher. They actually got divorced, Marie and Humphrey, in the 30s, and when World War II broke out, Humphrey once again enlisted, joining the RAF Volunteer Reserve, and he died in July 1949. So that's the brothers. And moving back to the firm itself, a lot of people know that it opened in Chadderton in 1939 and, produced 1 or 2 planes during the war. But it also, World War II, sorry. But it also played a huge part in the First World War, and this is where I'm going to kind of move on to next, okay? We're coming to order, I promise. So when Elliot founded the company, he did so at a site in Brownsfield Mill in Ancoats. So this was built in 1825. It was a cotton spinning mill, but following the cotton famine in the 1860s, its use for cotton spinning declined, and from 1870 the separate floors were let out to different companies, individual owners for various different purposes, and one of these was AVRO. In 1910 it was founded in the basement of the building, so clearly not enough space to build planes there. It's where they were designed, and they kind of put them together initially before dismantling them and taking them to Brooklands in Surrey, one of the country's first airfields, opening in 1907. Because that's the thing, I was looking at this thinking, well, why didn't they just do it locally? There weren't many planes, were there? So of course there weren't many airfields, and that's something I'm going to come back to. So sorry, they took them down to Brooklands where they'd put the planes back together, and they would fly them, they would test them. Later they flew their planes at Woodford Aerodrome in Cheshire, briefly at Ringway Airport, Manchester Airport, during the Second World War. And during the First World War, AVRO supplied the Royal Flying Corps with many planes. And do you know what? I'm now just going to stop calling it the Royal Flying. Can't say it. Royal Flying. I'm going to refer to it as the RAF, because that's just a heck of a lot easier. That didn't actually come into being because it merged with the Royal Naval Air Service in 1918. So I might be technically incorrect. I can live with that. RAF, far easier. So AVRO made several different types of planes during this period, and we're going to have a quick look at some of them now. So we're starting with the 508, this rather snappy number. I think that's an engine. I'm going to work on the assumption that's an engine, okay? This was designed in 1913, but it wasn't a success. The RAF didn't want it. Thanks, but no thanks. So it was discontinued in 1916. The 510, designed in 1914, was used in the war, but only 5 were ordered. Again, it wasn't a massive success because it had a poor climbing rate. And despite being designed specifically to hold 2 pilots, it was very difficult to fly with the second person on board. But I mean, I'm laughing with them, not at them. Genuinely, this is at a time, we don't have planes like we have them now, and this is Elliot and his company learning from their mistakes, which is what it's all about. But I just find that so quintessentially British and charming. We're going to design it to have 2 pilots, but it doesn't work when we have the second pilot in it. But undeterred, AVRO grafted on and came out with the 519. And I think starting to see now kind of like the general plane shape that we recognise. It was essentially an improved 510, but only 4 were ordered. And it was viewed more of a, what can we learn from this, rather than cutting edge aeronautical design. There was the AVRO 521, which I think is really cute. Probably not what they were aiming for. But this was difficult to control, it wasn't widely produced. We've got the 523 Pike, which was the first to get a name, not just a number. Made me think of that guy. But it didn't get past prototype stage and did not enter production. And so, like I said, this is to highlight, not that I think any of these aircraft were failures, far from it. They were looking for ways to modify and improve, and we will see the results of this. But for now, we're going to stick with the most famous First World War plane of them all, the AVRO 504. Back to this cheeky little number. So what was it, besides a plane, and why was it so popular? So production started in 1913, and I remember I've said, oh, they designed this 5-word board, or 4-word board, none were board, didn't get past the prototype stage. 8,970 of these were made in World War I. A huge number. It was produced until 1932, and in total over 10,000 were made. It was a single engine, biplane bomber, accommodating a crew of 2 successfully. I kind of got really interested in wingspans and maximum speed, so I've got quite a few of those statistics for you fellow wingspan fans. So wingspan of 36 feet, maximum speed of 95 miles per hour. And it was the most produced aircraft of any kind during the First World War. And while it had many ticks in the "this is a really great plane" box, the reason for its popularity was a lot to do with the fact that essentially it was idiot-proof. It was extremely stable, it was simple to handle, and made the perfect plane for training novice pilots. Although it was a bomber, including its use in a famous bombing raid, which I'll come to shortly, it became outclassed by newer fighter planes during the war. So it was repurposed as the definitive training plane, and after the war became very popular in civilian aviation. And I refer to it simply as the AVRO 504. Over the years it was in production. There were many different variations, its different parts were modified. There was the 504C, which was a single-seat anti-Zeppelin and patrol aircraft. There was the 504L, which was a twin-float seaplane, mainly used for commercial pleasure flights and military training. The 504K was the most mass-produced variant with universal engine bearers. These are the heavy-duty frameworks that secure an aircraft's engine to the airframe. That bit's very boring, so I'm not actually going to read that. I kind of got lost in a bit of the detail. So the 504 was primarily used by British forces during the war, but it was also used in Australia, Belgium, France, Canada, Japan, Russia, and the USA. Germany did not buy any of the 504s during the First World War, probably understandably, but they clearly recognised quality when they saw it, as any they captured during the conflict, they used. And although it was greatly loved, it was discontinued in 1932 and replaced by the AVRO Tutor. And as I mentioned, the 504 became very popular in civilian aviation. In 1971, Neil Armstrong visited the UK and piloted an AVRO 504K biplane in the Shuttleworth collection in Old Warden, Bedfordshire. So, slightly better known for flying cutting-edge space rockets. Neil wanted to experience the unique feel of piloting a rotary engine aircraft, and he chose the 504 to do it. And you've designed something good if Neil Armstrong wants to fly it. And so back to that bombing raid I referred to. This was the Friedrichshafen raid, which took place on the 21st of November 1914. This was a raid to destroy Zeppelin sheds in Friedrichshafen, and this was important as Zeppelins were a significant threat to Allied territory and were being used for offensive bombing campaigns. So the raid by the British was a preemptive strike to hopefully disable them before they could cause widespread damage. So 3 British pilots left an airfield in Belfort, France in 504s, the AVRO 504s. And these men were Edward Featherstone Briggs, John Babington and Sidney Sipp. And I don't wish to rail or be disrespectful, but if you're called Edward Featherstone Briggs, can you actually be anything other than a First World War pilot? I mean, that name, yes, Edward Featherstone Briggs. You can't, he could not have been born any other time. So this trio flew out in their 504s on a 250-mile round trip to Friedrichshafen, deep in German territory, in what's considered to be the first strategic bombing raid in history. AVRO supplied the planes, designed them. They dropped bombs on the Zeppelin sheds, then flew back to France. John and Sydney did. Unfortunately, Edward's plane was shot down and he was captured and became a prisoner of war, where he remained until, of course, he escaped in April 1917. The Edward Featherstone Briggs of this world do not linger in prisoner of war camps. They dig themselves out. But this meant that the AVRO 504 became the first British aircraft to be shot down by enemy ground fire. I'm not saying that's something to be proud of, but it's another first. The bombing didn't cause huge amounts of damage, but it did show the Germans how vulnerable they were to this kind of lightning strike. So they moved their Zeppelin developments to Potsdam in Poland, which was beyond the reach of British aircraft. And all three of the pilots were awarded the Distinguished Service Order Medal, but due to his escape from a prisoner of war camp, Edward was also awarded a second bar to add to his medal, just so the world knew how daring do he was. So AVRO post-World War I. So kind of between the wars really, AVRO moved into manufacturing commercial light aircraft and military training planes. And there was a huge boom in civilian aviation after the war and the rise in popularity of what was called barnstorming. Now, I've never heard of that. Anybody know what barnstorming is?
No.
No, okay. I think we'll speak to
Flying
one of us.
low and smoke up back. They're not news that our woman's just done a wing walking on the barnstorm.
Yeah. Alright, so the barnstorms, it's not a plane. It's not a type of plane.
Yeah, no, it's what's called barnstorming. The different makes of plane what they use.
Of course he knows what it is. He knows what it is.
Well,
Yeah, no, you're right. It's basically pilots. He probably did it. Well, he's probably got a plane behind his flat. He goes out barnstorming on Sunday afternoons. Wouldn't surprise me. It's basically pilots touring the country in surplus World War I aircraft, performing dangerous stunts and offering the public what for most would probably be their very first flight. So the most famous name in British barnstorming after the war was Sir Alan Cobham, who had served in the Royal Army Veterinary Corps and then joined the Royal Flying Corps, RAF, became a flying instructor. And in the interwar period, he wanted to drum up business for his flying services. And so, I love it, he toured around England trying to encourage local councils to open air bases. Yeah, so still not very many. He wants to offer flying, as do lots of others, get those councils to open those air bases. So he'd arrive in his plane and give free flights to the local important people, the mayors, the VIPs, and to the children. So when he dropped the kids off, they would badger the parents and then he'd charge them a wedge of money. Made him lots of money. But like Alan, many of the barnstormers were pilots returning home from the war with, no jobs to go to, and the government was selling off surplus training aircraft. So they bought cheap planes, started barnstorming. And one plane that was very popular in this use was the AVRO Avian, which was designed and built to compete in the, I don't know how to pronounce it, Lympne light aircraft trials at Lympne Aerodrome in Kent in 1923, 24 and 26. And in the 26 trials, the Avian came second in 3 of the 6 tests, but was ultimately eliminated due to engine failure. Not good. But the engine issues were resolved. The Avian went on to become very popular in completing record-breaking long-distance flights. So these included the very first solo flight from England to Australia. This was completed by Bert Hinkler, an Australian, next to his AVRO Avian. He flew from London to Darwin in 1928, 11,000 miles, 15 and a half days. And in 1928, Lady Mary Heath became the first to fly solo from Cape Town to London, next to her Avian. This was a 10,000 mile journey which took 3 months. And this very same Avian was then sold to someone you might have heard of, Amelia Earhart, with the same plane, the AVRO Avian, and she used it to complete the first solo flight by a woman across the North American continent. So during this time, the AVRO had also developed the AVRO 61810, known as AVRO X, which I just think is super cool. AVRO X, yeah? Maybe not. This was a 3-engined airliner designed in 1929, carried 2 crew members and 8 passengers. The first 5 were sold to Australian National Airways, 4 went to British customers, and others were sold to India, Egypt and China. And there was the AVRO 64218. Doesn't that just scream Indiana Jones? You know what I mean? Like the opening of whichever film it is, it screams Indiana Jones. Maybe that was an AVRO. I'm now going to have to find out if that was an AVRO. Bet it was. So this was an 18-seat commercial airliner, 2 crew, 16 passengers, and the largest plane designed by AVRO at the time. One of the 2 planes, only 2 were built. One was used in Britain by Midland and Scottish Ferries and was later sold to New Guinea, where it was destroyed in World War II. And the other went to India and was operated by Indian National Airways and was dismantled in 1940 due to poor performance. Okay, so that was over 3,000 words. Which is usually about half of my talk, and I thought, well, I'd probably better get to Oldham's, parts in all of this. So the company's appearance right here in Oldham, in Chadderton, in 1939. So why? Why did the factory open specifically in Greengate? So AVRO needed to expand. Production had massively scaled up, and it needed to do so quickly in preparation for the war. The existing factory in Newton Heath was too small, and Chadderton and Oldham, with its rich industrial heritage, had many skilled workers who were pretty much ready to walk in and staff the factory. And the first plane to be produced here was the Bristol. Now I never know how to say this. Is it Blenheim or Blenheim?
Blenheim.
The Blenheim. The Bristol Blenheim. I mean, that just screams World War II. Edward Featherstone Briggs would have loved to have flown that one. Yes, so this actually, it wasn't an AVRO design. It was originally built by the Bristol Aeroplane Company, but because of the urgency of the coming war, AVRO was licensed to make them too. So the Bristol Blenheim was a light bomber, which meant it could carry bombs of up to 1,000 pounds in total weight. It was used extensively in the first 2 years of the war. Twin engine, faster than many contemporary RAF fighters, crewed 3 airmen, 56-foot wingspan, max speed of 288 miles per hour. So it was first built in September 1938, produced until November 1941 when it became obsolete for combat purposes. And AVRO needs to concentrate on another plane, which I'll come to shortly. You'll probably have heard of it. 4,400 Blenheims were made in total, with 1,000 of them being produced by AVRO. And it was used in bombing raids across Northern Europe, the Mediterranean, North Africa and the Far East. Next we had the AVRO Manchester, which, to put it charitably, was not a success. This was a twin-engined heavy bomber. The maximum load of bombs it carried was 10,350 pounds. And it was first flown in July 1939, powered by Rolls-Royce Vulture engines, which unfortunately proved to be extremely unreliable. It entered service in late 1940, but was so unreliable it had been grounded by April the following year. It was back in service in August that year, but due to the ongoing problems, production stopped for good in November that year. So this one crewed 7 airmen, 90-foot wingspan, max speed of 265 miles an hour. Only 202 are produced in total, and there are no complete remaining examples. Any surviving airframes were scrapped after the war. But despite its problems, it was used in successful bombing raids in France and Germany. But while this one proved essentially a disaster, it paved the way for one of the most famous and iconic of all bombers in World War II, called the Lancaster. Absolutely. I forgot to show you a picture of it. This was the RAF's premier heavy bomber throughout World War II. So the prototype was first flown in January 1941 and it entered service in the RAF in early 1942. Designed by Roy Chadwick, 7,377 were produced in total. It crewed 7 airmen, pilot, flight engineer, navigator, my all-time favourite job title, bomb aimer. I could do that. Wireless operator, mid-upper gunner and rear gunner, wingspan of 102 feet, maximum speed of 287 miles per hour. So basically Roy Chadwick took the Manchester and transformed it into the Lancaster. And you can see so many similarities. He kept the central airframe and the wings. He replaced the dodgy Rolls-Royce Vulture engines with the much more dependable Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. These had been used before, they were tried and tested. He did increase the wingspan by 12 feet, which allowed an increased bomb payload. As standard, the Lancaster carried 14,000 pounds of bombs, but could carry up to 22,000 pounds of bombs. I'll come back to that. He also modified and redesigned the tail and extended the bomb bay. And his design for the Lancaster shared so many components with the Manchester that all the Manchesters in production at that time were immediately converted and completed as Lancasters. So out of this interest for this plane, I had a look at how much it cost to build one. So in the 1940s, what do you think it cost to build a Lancaster? £5,000? 10,000? Okay, it cost between £45,000 and £50,000.
Wow.
But that's only equivalent to about £2 million today. Which I think actually, if I don't know, I saw on the news that they're building planes, they're £2 million each. I might think, well, that's pretty good. You know, I don't know. I think it seems pretty reasonable. And so, why was the Lancaster so famous? Well, there are 3 reasons, or 3 reasons that I come up with. So, firstly, the unmatched payload capacity. The standard payload, as I said, for a Lancaster was £14,000. The plane with the next biggest payload capacity was the Handley Page Halifax. That could carry £13,000. Not huge amounts in it. But it could also, the Lancaster could drop what were called earthquake bombs. And these were massive, deep penetration bombs designed to destroy heavily fortified Nazi targets. And there were 2 types of earthquake bombs. The Tall Boy, which weighed £12,000, and the Grand Slam, which weighed £22,000. And only the Lancaster was being used for carrying these bombs. And the third reason for the Lancaster becoming so famous was the of the Dam Busters raid in 1943. And when I practiced this with Marcus, I said, I should now have some music. And then I immediately forgot about it, and I'm wishing I had that music. And maybe some flashing lights and the sound of planes, but I didn't do any of that. Yes, Dam Busters, officially called Operation Chastise, love it. This raid took place overnight on May 16th and 17th, 1943. 19 Lancasters flew out of RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire at 9:30 p.m. Their targets were major dams in Germany's Ruhr Industrial Valley, and they were carrying the very famous Barn-Wallace invention, bouncing bombs. So the primary targets were the Muna, Ada and Zorpa dams, which provided water and hydroelectric power to Germany's armament factories. Now, these bouncing bombs were truly revolutionary. They were designed to skip across the water and avoid anti-torpedo nets, skimming stones. And then they would sink against the dam wall before exploding to cause maximum damage to the infrastructure. I love this I didn't make this, it's so sweet. But that's how they work. We're going to drop a bomb, it's going to bounce, it's going to spin, it's going to go down. See you, Muna Dam. So using these, the Muna and Ada dams were breached, and the resulting catastrophic flooding destroyed factories, bridges and infrastructure. But while the raid did cause short-term chaos, the Germans immediately diverted thousands of forced labourers to repair the dams, and they were operational again within months. So longer term, their industrial production didn't really suffer. And the raid wasn't without British losses. Of the 19 Lancasters that flew out from RAF Scampton, only 11 returned the following morning. 5 planes were lost en route to the dams. 1 was lost during the attack. That was damaged by the shock waves of the bomb when it landed. And 2 were lost on the way home. Some were shot down, some struck power lines due to flying at very low altitudes. And all in all, 53 of the 133 airmen who took part lost their lives, with an additional 3 being taken prisoner after they parachuted out of their damaged plane. But this did not stop the raid being a phenomenal propaganda success for Britain. It provided a huge morale boost on the home front. It showcased British technological innovation to the world and proved the RAF's elite precision bombing capabilities and cemented the Lancaster's legendary status. So the Lancaster came out of production in 1946, but there is a Canadian connection. I keep saying this tonight, which I'll come to shortly. I'm annoying myself with that. Just tell it now, Kelly. But it is very short with this one. But the Canadian variant was produced until 1964. So that was AVRO during the Second World War. You know, they went big, went home. You know, you didn't need to top it. It was such a phenomenal success. But what did they then do once World War II had finished? So they moved back to civilian aircraft and started developing Cold War military aircraft. And this is where things start to get quite tricky, I have to say. Okay. So before I move on to that, I'm not doing that next talk. I'll have a t-shirt, aren't I? I'm now going to do a quick detour to Canada. The Hawker Siddeley Group bought AVRO in 1935. So remember, Humphrey had already left after fisticuffs with his bond. I don't know if it was fisticuffs. Yeah, let's say it was fisticuffs. In 1917, and Elliott had actually left the company in 1928. Okay, he'd sold his shares and he purchased Elliott a controlling interest in a boat building firm, S.E. Saunders Limited, and founded Saunders Road to build seaplanes and flying boats. And in 1929, he received a knighthood for his hard work and rather awesome contributions to British aviation. In 1945, Hawker Siddeley, although obviously still trading as AVRO, in 1945, Hawker Siddeley bought Victory aircraft from the Canadian government and renamed it AVRO Canada. And so where relevant, I will refer to that subsidiary as well. So as I said, AVRO, post-World War II, now back in their civilian aircraft era. And in the UK, they made several planes, 3 of which I'm going to concentrate on for pretty much the remainder of tonight's talk. So first we have the AVRO Lancastrian. This was a civilian conversion of the Lancaster. So they removed the armour plating and gun turrets. They added a more streamlined nose, and it had between a 9 to 13 passenger cabin or freight compartments. And the Lancastrian went into production in 1945 and first saw commercial service in Australia, where it was used for flying mail and civilians. It was then used in the UK, Argentina, Canada and Italy. And in the UK, the Lancastrian was also used for military transport and heavily involved in the Berlin airlift. Anyone familiar with that? Yeah?
1948.
Checks notes. 1948. Well done. So, in 1948, the Soviet Union blockaded all land and water routes into West Berlin in an attempt to force the Allies out. In response, the UK and the States launched the Berlin airlift, and for nearly a year, 250,000 flights delivered almost 3 million tonnes of food, coal and medicine to West Berlin, and sustained over 2 million West Berliners throughout what was an incredibly harsh winter. And it was so successful, it forced the Soviet Union to lift the blockade in May 1949. And so, yeah, Lancastrian very much a part of that. And although it was a successful plane, it eventually became obsolete. It was made from converted Lancasters, and demand grew for greater passenger capacity. Also, it wasn't pressurised, so the compartments were very cold and very noisy. It wasn't exactly the last word in luxury. So purpose-built commercial aircraft were being built, so they overtook the Lancastrian and it was retired in 1960. And there was also the AVRO Shackleton. That's cool. This was a long-range maritime patrol and anti-submarine aircraft used heavily by the RAF and the South African Air Force during the Cold War. So the Shackleton had a wingspan of 120 feet, a max speed of 302 miles an hour, and carried 10 crew. It was manufactured between 1951 and 1958, but it was a stalwart of the RAF, and it was in service for 40 years before being retired in 1991. There were 185 built, and due to its incredibly heavy construction, it was nicknamed the Growler. So I read a joke online. This is, no credit for me. I read a joke online that it was never really built. It was actually 100,000 rivets flying in close formation. Oh, that tickled me. It was famously reliable and tough, and was renowned for its ability to fly extremely long distances on patrols, some patrols lasting up to 24 hours. And the Shackleton was used for maritime reconnaissance during the 1956 Suez Crisis, and eventually ceased production due to ageing and really reaching the limits of its performance. The ongoing Cold War needed fewer workhorses. It really needed faster jet-powered aircraft, and this is where another of the most famous and iconic of all of AVRO's aircraft came into creation, the Vulcan. And this is the bit I was referring to when I said things were going to get a bit sexy. Just look at it! If you're going to describe a plane as sexy, it's this one. There is one more coming up, which is quite sexy too. But just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I've got sidetracked, I've lost myself. Yes, so this was a jet-powered delta wing airplane. Delta, because of the triangular wings. Delta. I mean, I was like, do I need to put this in? But it's an extra slide, let's do it. So this famous plane was used by the RAF between 1956 and 1985, and it had a wingspan of 111 feet, 5 crew, and a maximum speed of a whopping 644 miles an hour, and that impressed me. And so I had to look to see, well, that must be the fastest speed ever for a plane, but of course it wasn't. It was the fastest British-built AVRO plane, but AVRO Canada produced the AVRO CF-105, ARROW, and it's quite sleek, which had a top recorded speed of 1,307 miles an hour. Well, surely that was the fastest plane. Nope. This one, I mean, look at that. When I talk about James Bond, that looks as though it could just fly to another galaxy. This is, I've lost it, the Lockheed Blackbird. And this reached speeds of 2,193 miles an hour. And so I get so distracted when I'm researching, and this speed business led me to looking at the speed barrier. So to break the speed barrier, you need to fly between 660 and 767 miles an hour, depending on altitude, air temperature, and density. Now you know. So clearly the AVRO Arrow, the Canadians, and the Blackbirds obviously would have no problem with that. The Vulcan is never officially credited with breaking the sound barrier, but there are unofficial reports that it did once, but it was in a shallow dive. And I think I'm going to take that. I think we'll take possibly as definitely did. And so the Vulcan, sorry Blackbird, we're getting rid of you, was the absolute keystone of Britain's Cold War nuclear deterrent. It was designed to deliver a nuclear payload if needed. It also played a central role in the 1965 James Bond film Thunderball, where it was hijacked to hold NATO to ransom with 2 atomic bombs. The Vulcan was iconic, and this was due in part to its tailless design, but also due to the distinctive howl it made. Now I've got a recording, but I'm just thinking, have I connected to the Wi-Fi here before? Shall we have a little look? See if I can make this work. Oh no, I'm not connected to the internet. Oh, boo. I honestly thought I was. Well, if you go to YouTube, you can find, I mean, that how is amazing. So I had some, oh no, where's my silence gone? You can obviously have a look.
Can you not just do an impression of it?
If this wasn't being recorded, I'd give it my best shot. If I had a couple of gin and tonics, I possibly would. No, I'll make sure. I'll tell you what. Regardless of what my next talk's about, I'm starting with the Vulcan how. I will sort out my what's connected here. But yeah,
I've heard it, and it is horrendous.
Yeah.
My ex-husband was an aeronautical engineer.
Oh right.
Yeah. Wow, it was noisy.
Yeah.
It was very noisy. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
at Waddington.
Interesting.
I was based at Waddington when the Vulcans were there.
Oh right.
Absolutely fantastic.
They are. So they look good. They sound good as well.
Fantastic. Yeah.
The Vulcan was a guy who would never be single. That was a weird. Yeah. Should we get back to the play? My mind's going somewhere. So the how that you haven't just listened to, but it sounds like you all kind of know what it's about. This is the plane's acoustic resonance caused by air being sucked into its engines when they exceed 92% power. So 100 kilograms of air per second. Now, incidentally, okay, so Lancasters in the 40s cost between £45,000 and £50,000 to build in money then. So when the Vulcan was built in 1956, what do you think it cost?
1.2 million.
About 2 million.
Right.
6 million.
Well, it was £750,000.
Oh.
But to go from
Got a bargain there.
10 years previously, yeah, I'll have 10. You know, that it was 45 to 50. I mean, different planes, different capabilities, but just 10, 11, 13 years later, 750, you know, £1,000. By 1963, that cost had risen to £1 million. And it's roughly equivalent to about £24 million per plane today, which I think is still really good value. You know, £2 million for a Vulcan that looks and sounds like that. Yes, please. And the average cost, I mean, Google told me where it gets its information from, but the average cost for a fighter jet today is between 70 and 140 million pounds. So if we could get some more of those for 2 million pounds, I think would be very good. Cost of living crisis, let's, you know, save money where we can. And perhaps it's the Vulcan, well, let's go back to the Vulcan. Perhaps its most famous use was when it took part in Operation Black Buck during the Falklands War. So these were long-range bombing raids conducted by the RAF during the Falklands War, and the goal was to bomb Port Stanley Airport's runway to stop Argentina basing aircraft there. And there were 7 raids in total, 5 of which were successful, with the Vulcans delivering £1,000 bombs. This was an incredibly long-range operation involving 16-hour flights after setting off from Ascension Island in the South Atlantic Ocean. It was a 6,600 nautical mile round trip, equivalent to 7,595.15 standard land miles. And again, I was like, oh, what's the difference? And so I researched it, and I'm still none the wiser. So nautical miles are not an arbitrary fixed amount. They are tied to the Earth's coordinates, whereas land miles aren't. So anyway, there we go, that's the difference. I agree, that's how interesting I found it. But whether nautical or land miles, you know, this was an extremely long-range operation, and the Vulcans were refuelled mid-air from Victor tank aircraft along the way. And at the time, Operation Black Buck held the record for the longest ranged bombing mission in history. So another record set by AVRO. I mean, that's now been beaten by wars since, but it just shows, you know, the cutting edge technology of these planes. And so then, you know, I guess the later years of AVRO. So in 1962, AVRO Canada closed down. So its most famous design, as I've mentioned, was the CF-105 Arrow. And I mentioned that when talking about its maximum speed of 1,307 miles an hour. But in February 1959, the Canadian government just abruptly cancelled the programme, blaming the decision on the programme cost at that time of $1.1 billion. And this decision became known as Black Friday. 14,500 AVRO Canada employees lost their jobs overnight. And having lost its main defence contract, AVRO Canada basically fell apart and liquidated and closed completely in 1962. In July 1963, the British arm, AVRO Company, was officially dissolved and merged into Hawker Siddeley as a single unified brand, ceasing to exist as an independent entity altogether in 1962. In 1977, Hawker Siddeley became part of British Aerospace, and in 1999, British Aerospace merged with Marconi Electronic Systems, becoming BAE Systems. And the operation at Chadderton finally closed for good on March 2nd, 2012. So the last aircraft to be developed by AVRO prior to absorption into Hawker Siddeley was the AVRO 748. First flown in June 1960, this commercial aircraft could fly seats between 40 and 48 passengers. It was very popular. Around 380 were produced between 1961 and 1988, and it was widely used by civilian regional airliners and military operations worldwide. So it's no longer used for civilian aviation, but it is still used for military purposes by the Indian Air Force. And the very last branded AVRO aircraft was the AVRO RJX. This was a regional airliner developed by BAE Systems in 1997, and it was also the last aircraft to be fully manufactured in the UK. However, only 3 were made between 2000 and 2001, 2 prototypes and 1 production aircraft, before the programme was cancelled in November 2001 as a result of a sharp drop in aircraft sales post 9/11. A prototype was donated to Manchester Airport, where it's on permanent display. And there are so many AVRO planes. I haven't scratched the surface. They were very prolific, and so I had to choose, the most famous, the most iconic, and the ones that appealed to me most. There was the AVRO Baby, Avenger, Atlantic, Lincoln, Bison, Buffalo, Spider, Cadet, Club Cadet, Commodore, York, just to name a few. And I was thinking of doing a but I thought no one wants that. I'll give everyone a migraine. So I had to make hard choices. But as always, if you've enjoyed planes, let me know. I will do a follow-up to this because, come on. I want to look at the AVRO Baby. What was the difference between the AVRO Cadet and the AVRO Club Cadet? Was that the one for the really posh people? Just AVRO Spider. But yeah, if you want to know more, let me know. I will happily do another talk. But I'm not quite finished yet. I wanted to finish by giving the last few minutes to Roy Chadwick. So famously remembered as the designer of the Lancaster bomber. So born in 1893, Roy started working as Elliott's personal assistant and draftsman at AVRO in September 1911 at the age of 18. He became AVRO's chief designer in 1918 and was responsible for, I've missed him out, there we go, practically all their aircraft designs before his death. So work started on the AVRO Tudor in 1943. It turned out to be not very stable, and modifications were made to improve this, but it never really lived up to expectations, and it wasn't suitable for the North Atlantic operations it had been designed for. So it was eventually scrapped. And this led to the Tudor II being designed by Roy and his team, and it was the prototype for this that he was flying on the 23rd of August 1943 at Woodford Aerodrome in Greater Manchester. Unknown to Roy and his crew, during the overnight servicing, the aileron cables had been accidentally crossed. So aileron cables connect the plane's cockpit to the wing flaps. And by being crossed, it meant control of the aircraft was completely reversed. So during takeoff, instead of going up, the plane dived at great speed into the ground, and Roy and the 3 crew members were all killed. And the AVRO Tudor 2 did go into production and was also used during the Berlin airlift, but commercially it was a disappointment. Only 38 built between 1945 and 1949. But thanks to Roy's genius, AVRO were able to design and develop so many planes that were invaluable during the World Wars. And he is rightly commemorated by a blue plaque on the surviving office building of the AVRO factory in Chedderton. Roy Chadwick Way in Poynton is also named after him. The 3.5 kilometre relief road opened in March 2023 and crosses through the former site of the AVRO aircraft manufacturing plant and the runway at Woodford Aerodrome, where he worked and tragically died. And about 2 or 3 weeks, I was on my way to meet 2 of my girlfriends for a hike, and I always go one particular way, but Sat-Nav took me in another way, and I'm on Roy Chadwick Way. I'm on Roy Chadwick Way. I mean, I never even knew this existed at that point. And so I got out of the car, met my friends, and I was like, oh, I have to tell you about this. And luckily they've known me forever. They're very used to this. They're like, right, you've got 5 minutes. Tell us about this Roy, what's his name? Roy Chadwick? So they allowed me the first, let's say 10 minutes of the hike. I was like, this movie, that. And they're very, very understanding. But I was just like, oh, yes, Roy Chadwick Way. I was so excited coming here. I was like, Roy Chadwick Way. But before we finish, I just put this together, this slide, comparing the first AVRO design, the AVRO plane, 1907, with the Vulcan. That's a 1956 image of the Vulcan. 49 years separate those 2 designs. I mean, 49 years is nothing. I'm 49 years old, actually. That's a bit bizarre. I've not thought about that. But it's just, I don't know, that when I looked at the 2 together, I thought, I want to share this. Going from, we don't even know how that's powered, and that carries nuclear bombs. You know, that costs, well, no more than £12,000. That costs 2 million. You know, it's just bonkers. It's the transformation that AVRO brought about. And I know Elliot and Humphrey were no longer involved in AVRO by the time the Vulcan was created, but I consider all of it to be part of his legacy, and that knighthood was very well earned. Yes. The end. Thank you.